Putin and his far-right fascist international. Yes, you heard it right. If you watch Russian TV, you will know that our bureaucrats' and brainwashers' favorite pastime is fighting against fascism. They do all they can to put an end to that damn fascism, which is apparently everywhere. Let's start by exploring what this looks like.
From west to east, from Britain to Greece, far-right groups are speaking out all over Europe. Our president stated hushing up and rewriting history is unacceptable. One can thus say that the Third Reich and the rest of the West were on the same team.
Those who rewrite history are desecrating the memory of those who died in the Second World War, Vyacheslav Volodin stated.
I can't believe the European Court for Human Rights is taking the side of some Nazi scum and is putting the blame on the country that won the war. Ukrainians and Lithuanians are completely whitewashing Nazism together.
The Poles have proposed a resolution in European Parliament to the effect that USSR was an instigator of the war along with Germany.
It seems that a spark could start a new fire in the middle of Europe. These are the opponents of the German migration policy. Their rallies are held here every Monday.
You know all that very well, and I've seen it 100 times. But now we'll tell you about something you will never hear about on the federal TV channels. How Putin in its propaganda, while telling tales about their alleged anti-fascism, at the same time are not only in bed with all sorts of fascist scum all over Europe, but also are giving them a lot of our money. So hold on to your seats, and in the next few minutes you will see a pretty nasty picture of Putin causing up with the most radical right-wing extremists in Europe.
In bed with dictators.
This is Vladimir Milov, and I actually got the idea for this video from the recent news about Karin Kneißl getting nominated to the board of directors of our largest oil company Rosneft. We are talking about the lady, or whatever she is, you can look at the photo and judge for yourself, who had been the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Austria, and became famous when Putin came to Vienna for a wedding and danced with her at that wedding. Now I'll tell you why Karin Kneißl and her colleagues from the Austrian Freedom Party were expelled from the government and why she is on her own. And now she has been nominated to the Rosneft board of directors, where she will receive at least $500,000 per year and perhaps more, just for sitting on the Rosneft board, which usually meets in absentia, meaning she will just have to send an email once a month, sign some papers, since all the decisions are made by others anyway. A very nice sinecure for $500,000 a year. The story isn't even about Karin Kneißl and not even about her dancing with Putin. It just gave me the idea of telling you about this global alliance between Putin and various European fascists, who are not just the best friends of Putin regime inside Europe, but are actually also very generously funded by Moscow, as we just saw in this particular case. I decided to tell you about these far-right European political parties, which are the closest allies and best friends of the Putin regime in the West.
In bed with dictators.
The point is, this Karin Kneißl person, the former foreign minister made famous by dancing with Putin, was once nominated to head the Austrian foreign ministry by the so-called Austrian Freedom Party. What a lovely name! We all love freedom. Austrian Freedom Party is a bit deceptive though. They are really about something slightly different. What else is this party famous for? Several years ago, the Austrian Freedom Party was very actively involved with the Kremlin. And a few years ago, it signed a cooperation and friendship agreement with our own ruling party of crooks and thieves, United Russia. At this point, we should recall all the heroic anti-fascist struggle on TV. We won't let anyone rewrite history. We need new penalties for the denial of Nazi crimes, and so forth. All of that, and then you're reminded of the friendship and cooperation agreement between the ruling United Russia Party and the Austrian Freedom Party. And what kind of Freedom Party is it? Let's have a closer look. The lovely man that you are about to see on the screen is a man who founded this friend of United Russia, the Austrian Freedom Party, in 1956. Do you know where this man, Anton Rheintaler, used to work? Don't fall off your seats. But he used to work as an SS Brigadeführer. I'm not kidding. It's interesting, by the way, that there's no article about him on Russian Wikipedia. But otherwise you can find whatever you want on him. Anton Rheintaler was a Nazi collaborator during Hitler's Anschluss of Austria. And by the way, apart from his SS job, Rheintaler was convicted after the war by an Austrian court as a key collaborator who aided and abetted the Anschluss, that is, the Nazi occupation of Austria. So he was a major Nazi collaborator. Indeed, it was after he had served his sentence that he decided to set up this wonderful Freedom Party, which is now United Russia's best friend in Austria, and appoints ministers who not only dance with Putin, but also receive $500,000 a year for doing nothing at our own Rosneft oil company. Really, you should go ahead and read a little about this Freedom Party. I only gave you some headlines. For instance, in the 80s and 90s, this party was famously led by a figure named Jörg Haider, who became renowned for his remarks that it was not all so black and white, you know. In fact, he spent his time whitewashing the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS of the crimes committed during the Second World War, and generally declaring clear sympathies for Nazism and saying that despite some individual excesses, one must not dismiss the bravery of the soldiers, and so on and so forth. This man was really quite open about his sympathies for the German authorities and army of that period. Haider later died in a car crash. After that, the Freedom Party tried to build a more respectable image, and a few years ago joined the government led by Sebastian Kurz as a chancellor. By why was this party thrown out of the government? And in particular, why did Karin Kneißl lose her position as foreign minister? The same Karin that was nominated to Rosneft and had danced with Putin. Well, they lost their jobs in a very simple way. Go Google the story called Ibiza-gate. What is that about? It's a scandal. It was a very complex operation, as a result of which during their holidays in Ibiza, the Freedom Party leader Heinz Christian Strache, the future Vice-Chancellor of Austria, was recorded having a private conversation. The story was as follows. This was well before the election and before he got government positions, so some woman who, as it turned out, was lying and pretending in order to make this recording, told him that she was a relative of a Russian oligarch, specifically Igor Makarov, the owner of the Itera company. She said she could offer him very significant media support. Well, this was during the election period, yes, but she said that Russian oligarchs have certain media capabilities to promote the Freedom Party in exchange for lucrative government contracts. After Strache and the Freedom Party joined the government. And on this recording, Strache openly says, "Yes, I'm ready to accept Russian support in exchange for lucrative public contracts in the future." I probably don't need to explain that this is corruption. The scandal was nasty. Not only was the Freedom Party led by Strache thrown out of the government, which also meant that Karin Kneißl lost her post as a foreign minister, but firstly it was just another episode, and as we will find out today, by far not the only one, where it became clear who Putin's pals really are. They are European far-right Nazi sympathizers. They are also extremely corrupt. They have no honest bone in their body, and they are willing to take money and other forms of support from anyone who makes an offer in exchange for corrupt decisions. Because for them, money and power are everything. In fact, the scandal in Austria also had long-term political consequences. Because before it occurred, this very Freedom Party founded by an SS Brigade Führer Rheintaler, was doing very well in the polls because of the anti-immigrant agenda and Euroscepticism. But after the scandal, it firmly fell to the third place and no longer stands a chance in the foreseeable future to return to the commanding heights of Austrian politics, because the image that it gained was not great. So it became clear that all these far-right Eurosceptics and proponents of strong leadership are in reality just a bunch of corrupt crooks. Heinz Christian Strache's Ibiza tape showed this very clearly.
In bed with dictators.
The Austrian far-right are not the only best buddies Putin has in Europe. Here, he is shaking hands with the French National Front leader Marine Le Pen, one of the best-known French politicians today, whose platform is staunchly conservative and anti-European. That is, of course, music to Putin's ears. There he is, hosting her in the Kremlin. So let's talk about Marine Le Pen and the kind of party she leads. Of course, people who follow French politics know the answers already, but it's good to recall them for the Russian audience. The founder of this National Front was a former paratrooper and a prominent figure in post-war French politics, Jean-Marie Le Pen. This man holds extreme conservative, xenophobic and anti-Semitic views. Not only was he always open, for instance, about his pro-Nazi sympathies, but on several occasions was even convicted, including by a German court, for Holocaust denial, for example, precisely for Nazi propaganda. Le Pen has been notorious for his enthusiastic praises of the so-called Vichy regime. What is the Vichy regime? During the Second World War, France pretty much gave itself up to Hitler and did not fight him. In exchange, Hitler led the French form of puppet government, led by Marshal Pétain, in the southern half of the country. Instead of Paris, its capital was a town named Vichy, so it was known as a Vichy regime. So Jean-Marie Le Pen, the founder of the National Front and father to Marie Le Pen, his successor after he retired from politics, was this overt supporter of Nazism and used to say things like, "We were right to collaborate with Hitler, and the Holocaust was just a minor episode which actually never happened." Guys, I'm not making this up. This has all been confirmed, including in many court judgments. Now, Jean-Marie Le Pen, the party's founder, was the man who turned the National Front into one of the leading political parties in France. In 2002, he made it to the second round of the French presidential elections. He was squarely beaten in the second round. It was the point at which it became clear that the National Front has become one of the most powerful political forces in France, attracting various ultra-conservative people. After that, Jean-Marie Le Pen retired and was replaced by his more presentable daughter, whose task was to pretend she was this decent lady and to distance herself from his most radical views. Neo-Nazis often adopt this tactic when they try to get into mainstream politics. Still, you must understand that when Jean-Marie Le Pen ran for the French presidency in 2002, people that voted for him were fully aware of his Holocaust denial and his sympathies for the Vichy Nazi collaborators. That was all known. And it's these same French voters who knew everything about Marine Le Pen's dad, who now vote for his daughter and her party, who enjoy snuggling up to Putin and are Putin's principal allies in France. What's really telling, by the way, is how when Donald Trump was elected President of the United States and Marine Le Pen also made it to the second round of the French presidential elections, this time in 2017, against Emmanuel Macron, who eventually won, the Kremlin had high hopes that Le Pen had some sort of chances, and all sorts of pro-Putin morons walked around with posters featuring Putin, Trump, and Le Pen together. That's it, a brave new word, a far-right international. Here, guys, I'm just telling you about all these lovely people who are Putin's main allies in Europe, one at a time. And here is one more point that is likely to hit home with some of my audience. Marine Le Pen's party, the National Front, forms part of the far-right identity and democracy group in the European Parliament. That is the only European Parliament group openly opposed to the recently adopted resolutions on the attempted poisoning of Alexei Navalny and to introducing sanctions against Putin for all that he is doing, for the reprisals against the opposition, for Navalny, and for using illegal chemical weapons. That is the far-right group in the European Parliament, which includes Marine Le Pen's party. Not only was it among the most ardent opponents of any measures against Putin, but in fact actively defended him. And actually, here's a quote from a video message by one of the prominent party members, Thierry Mariani, MEP. He is an old Putin ally, known for spending a lot of time in Crimea, followed by Russia Today and Russian state TV cameras, and talking about how Crimea is of course Russian, and that Russia did nothing wrong by taking it over. Well, Crimea is one thing, and another thing is Thierry Mariani's speech about the Navalny's poisoning. In early September 2020, Mariani said all the same things using the European Parliament as a platform. We shouldn't jump to conclusions about Putin's and the Russian government's role in the alleged poisoning. It must first be investigated. There is no evidence whatsoever. You can hear it yourself.
Like all the Democrats, I would like to sincerely wish the speediest of recovery to Alexei Navalny. But as any peace advocate, I would not want this drama to be used by those who would wish to revive tensions between the European Union and Russia. Yes, the truth must be found out. Yes, the investigation must be conducted. Yes, the guilty must be, if this is a poisoning indeed, the guilty must be punished. However, let us not run with the conclusion even before the investigation has begun. When I see, for example, a French diplomat stating a hashtag "We know who is guilty," is that responsible? It is clear that some are using this drama to try and revive tensions between Russia and the European Union. We complement each other. The EU needs Russia and Russia needs the European Union. And we must absolutely reject all those that seek to use this drama, to pour oil into the fire. All those that have immediately found the guilty, explaining that it is the Russian government that is guilty, that it is the president of Russia that is behind all this. Let us seek out the truth. We wish Alexei Navalny good recovery, and we wish for the relations between Russia and Europe to be getting better. This is a mutual interest, and it is my dearest wish.
And then the final story about the French far-right. The story of money. Of course, Russian money was involved. Here is the story. It's quite well known. It's about Marine Le Pen and her party getting major loans. Serious loans. I was pretty baffled hearing about that. What? Loans for a political party? Who is going to repay that? It's not like we're talking about some commercial company with any kind of income. You know what I'm getting at, right? It's a manifestly non-repayable loan. They took out a loan from Russian banks. And as a result, Russian organizations started complaining that Marine Le Pen is not repaying that loan. This was a scandal playing out entirely in the public eye over the recent several years. Of course, Putin has many other far-right allies in Europe who try to act as though they are not taking any Russian money and use all sorts of underhand ways to get to it. Marine Le Pen is different. She just said openly, "No one else would give me money, they all boycott me, nobody loves me, so my only choice was to take a loan from a Russian bank." It was this major event in European politics when Putin's far-right bodies openly admitted that since they can't get any money through fundraising at home, they just take dosh from the Russians, and quite a lot of it. Wherever you see the far-right, you can also find Russian money. It's like low physics.
In bed with dictators.
And here's more about Russian money. All of these performances for Crimea and against Navalny, they are clearly not for free. And it is not only true for the French. Let's talk about our lovely and wonderful Italian friends and the far-right League Party, which used to be called the Northern League. It was recently shaken by an enormous scandal after it was discovered that a major party official had been in Moscow, in the Metropole Hotel, discussing big money funding from Russia. I should also mention that the charismatic leader of this Italian far-right league, Matteo Salvini, is generally a great fan of Putin. He is a well-known picture of him sporting a Putin t-shirt here in Moscow on Red Square. He sings all kinds of different praises for Putin, but his praises are not just for Putin. He also loves to praise the Italian dictator of the Hitler period, Benito Mussolini. That's right, the Mussolini. Indeed, this seems to be the view of many prominent Putin propagators, for instance Vladimir Solovyov, the known Russian TV propagandist. He recently spoke along the lines, and I believe even made a film about Mussolini, how Mussolini was this great, courageous macho guy. Solovyov, by the way, also said that Hitler was a very courageous man. But enough about Solovyov. Let's get back to the fact that the League Party and its leader Salvini obviously sympathized with that period of Italian history and with Mussolini, who, as you know, was one of Hitler's closest partners in the Berlin-Rome-Tokyo axis. So here we have Austria, France, and now also Italy. It seems to be a key feature of these far-right European parties who act against democracy in Europe and fervently oppose the democratic EU. They constantly sympathize either with the German Nazis or the Italian fascist Benito Mussolini and his dictatorship. That's something unique about them. So what we see here is a very real and powerful international movement spanning from Moscow to Vienna, from Rome to Paris, which basically is saying, we like that part of history. That Mussolini was a courageous man, that Hitler was a courageous man. I just can't resist quoting Vladimir Solovyov, who said,
as a person, Hitler was actually very brave.
And of course, Russian money. Nothing without the Russian money. Russian money and the fascists are always a must for each such case. Matteo Salvini's closest advisor Gianluca Savioni, who heads the League Party, got caught and was filmed in Moscow in the Metropole Hotel discussing possible major funding from the Russians, obviously to fund his continued anti-European activities and the promotion of his cutting-edge fascist ideology among the Italian masses. This Savioni recording scandal was a major blow for the far League. It was not as bad as the Pizzagate had been for the Freedom Party in Austria, but still, these are clearly all bricks in the same wall, bringing us even more evidence that it is no accident that European far-right and Hitler sympathizers use anti-European rhetoric, deny the poisoning of Alexei Navalny by Russian government authorities, and say that Crimea is Russia. None of this is for free. In the Austrian case, we see money paid to the European far-right. In the French case, we also see money paid to the European far-right. Same in Italy. They can't do without Russian money.
In bed with dictators.
This could go on and on. I don't want to bore you too much, but let's look at another example, the Netherlands. But there are also very strong far-right Eurosceptic feelings. There is a whole pile of publications about the Dutch far-right being caught red-handed with ties to Russia. The main leader of the Dutch far-right is Geert Wilders, another Freedom Party. Why do fascists really love that word so much? Geert Wilders openly advocates friendship and cooperation with Putin. We should not reject Putin, he says. Well, in the Netherlands that's a difficult position to take, especially after the 2014 downing of the Boeing airplane, where so many Dutch citizens were killed. And yet, the Dutch far-right still has the audacity to say these kind of things. By the way, I'm very proud that the leader of the main Dutch far-right party, Geert Wilders, blocked me on Twitter. I will take that as a fighter for the unity of pro-democracy forces across Europe. It's like a badge of honor for me. And then, of course, the Germans. We can't talk about all this without talking about the Germans. One will think, how is any neo-Nazism possible in Germany after all that happened? Yet they do have this new party, the Alternative for Germany, which arose in recent years, and it likewise promotes far-right, Eurosceptic views. And you can read this kind of stuff all over the place in Germany. A Bundestag member said that the Crimea is Russia. A Bundestag member said that there is no evidence of Putin involvement in Navalny's poisoning. And most of the time, all this comes from the MPs from AfD, the far-right Alternative for Germany party. And at the same time, they are trying to distance themselves. They say, oh no, we're just this modern party for the people. Yeah, right. Ein Volk, ein Führer, eine Partei. We have nothing whatsoever to do with Hitler. Of all these far-right European parties, the German AfD is perhaps most in denial about any connections with that period. They say, oh no, we are only against migration and multiculturalism, but of course we are not for Hitler. Still, you know, they constantly slip. One day a party leader says that one must not forget the sacrifice of the Wehrmacht. Another day they discover that one of their guys needs to be expelled from some leading position because it turns out that he used to be an overt neo-Nazi before joining AfD. The party is constantly shaken by this kind of scandals. It's sort of like in The Fifth Element. They are trying to pretend to be human, but the monster keeps on popping out of them in different places. And of course, they are also Putin's best mates. For instance, just a few months ago, they met him in Moscow, where an AfD delegation was received for Foreign Minister Lavrov, who had barely finished another patriotic rant on his along the lines of, we cannot allow the outcome of World War II being revised and Nazism being whitewashed. Lavrov says this in one of microphones and then reaches for another microphone to speak to the German far right, who are all concerned about the Wehrmacht sacrifice not being sufficiently honored and have their hands full purging their ranks of neo-Nazis who keep getting exposed.
In bed with dictators.
What I would like to tell you is this. All this talk about how Putin and his gang are these great fighters against fascism, fighting against the denial of Nazi crimes and so on, it's all a bunch of hypocrisy. You only need to look at their bodies inside democratic Europe. Nobody wants anything to do with these people. All the other parliamentary parties vote against them. Look, for instance, all the vote on Navalny, all the groups, the Christian Democrats, the Social Democrats, the Liberals, the Conservatives, the Greens, they were all anonymous. Putin did poison Navalny. Illegal chemical weapons were used. We do need sanctions. Putin did violate Ukraine's territorial integrity, he did commit aggression, he did grab Ukraine's land. All the parties say so except Putin cronies, the far right. We have already talked about the roots of these parties. They grew from the 1930s. Anton Rheintaler, Jean-Marie Le Pen, Matteo Salvini, and all the other great characters have, one way or another, become notorious for their sympathies with Mussolini, the SS, and so on. Even the founders of some of them. Again, let's remember that United Russia's best friend in Austria, the Austrian Freedom Party, was founded by an SS Brigade Führer Rheintaler. So you know, for our home consumption here in Russia, for the fools who trust the television, they will go on about how they are the biggest anti-fascists ever. And what do Putin, Lavrov and all this scum do after telling us these tales? They go on hugging with the actual fascists from Europe. European fascists who reject a democratic Europe and sympathize with what was going on in Europe in the 30s and 40s. Those are their best mates. And the problem is not just this blatant hypocrisy, which I absolutely can stand. The problem is that this hypocrisy is all being financed with our money. I would love to see what would happen to this European far right if the generous stream of money flowing from Moscow dried up. And take a guess where the source of that stream lies. It's our tax money, of course. The Austrian Freedom Party got caught when it was about to take Russian doge. Marine Le Pen took the Russian cash and now refuses to pay it back. Salvini's advisor in Italy got caught negotiating about Russian cash at the Metropole Hotel. The Dutch far right is dependent on Russia, and so on. The list is endless, and also includes various smaller fascist movements. I only told you about the main ones today. This was Vladimir Milov and In Bed with Dictators, your favorite program about international politics. Never forget what Putin is really doing on the world arena. He is building a far-right fascist international movement. All while telling stories on national TV that his gang are the biggest anti-fascists in the world. This is a lie. Remember that. Share this video with those who remain susceptible to the poisonous influence of our state propaganda. We speak the truth here. Thank you for subscribing to my channel, and if you haven't already, please do. It will definitely be interesting.
In Bed with Dictators.